Welcome to the Realtors Podcast, your go-to resource for everything real estate. Whether you're a seasoned agent or just starting out, we provide actionable tips, market insights, and success stories to help you grow your business. Tune in for expert advice, industry trends, and the inspiration you need to thrive in the competitive world of real estate. Stay ahead of the game with the Realtors Podcast.
All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling a question that's got a lot of people dreaming big. Can foreigners actually buy property in Australia?
It's a question we get a lot.
Our intel comes from a NerdWallet Australia article published April 2024. And it's not a simple yes or no answer.
Definitely not. It's more nuanced than that.
So let's break it down. First off, who are we even talking about when we say foreigner?
Yeah, the article outlines a few different categories. You've got, non-residents, non-citizens, people on temporary visas. The list goes on.
So lots of different situations. But for this deep dive, let's focus on individuals.
Sounds good. Makes sense. Most people are probably thinking about that. Buy-in as an individual.
Now, the article does mention a few exceptions. Australian citizens living abroad, for example. They aren't considered foreigners in this situation.
Exactly. And neither are citizens of New Zealand.
Makes sense, given their close ties.
Right.
And permanent visa holders are also okay?
Yep. Those folks are all good.
Interesting. So if you fall outside those exceptions, what happens next? What's the process?
Well, that's when the Foreign Investment Review Board, or FIRB, comes in. This is where it gets interesting.
Okay, FIRB. What's their role in all of this?
Basically, they're the gatekeepers. They review applications from anyone who isn't a resident and wants to buy property.
So they're making sure everything's above board.
Exactly. They want to ensure the purchase aligns with what Australia considers its national interest.
National interest. What does that actually mean in this context?
Basically, making sure the purchase benefits Australia economically. Will it create jobs? Will it contribute to the housing supply? Those kinds of things.
So it's not just about having the money. You actually need to convince the government that your purchase is good for Australia.
Yeah, you've got to make a case for it. And the application itself, involves providing all sorts of details.
I bet. And I'm guessing there are fees involved.
You bet there are. And they're not cheap either.
I saw a table in the article outlining the fees for new dwellings.
Right. For a property under $75,000, the application fee is $4,200. But here's the kicker. As the property value goes up, so does that fee.
Oh, wow. So on top of the down payment, closing costs, you've got these FIRB fees to consider.
Oh, and there's more. You'll need a tax file number. You got to register your property with the Australian Taxation Office, file an annual return. It's a process.
Sounds like a mountain of paperwork.
There's definitely some paperwork involved, but the takeaway here is that understanding these financial aspects is crucial before you even think about looking at properties.
Good point. Now, are there any restrictions on what foreigners can buy? Like property types?
Absolutely. Generally, non-residents are limited to buying new dwellings or off-the-plan properties.
Off the plan? What does that even mean?
So imagine buying a property before it's actually built, like signing a contract for a unit that's still in the planning stages. That's off the plan.
Ah, okay. I see. So what's the appeal of that for a foreign investor?
Well, off-the-plan properties are often sold at a discount compared to existing homes. Plus, they're brand new. They come with warranties, the latest features. It can be pretty attractive.
That makes sense. But what about financing? Is it possible for foreigners to get a mortgage in Australia?
It is possible, but it's a bit more challenging than it is for Australian residents. Not all lenders are willing to work with non-residents.
So finding the right lender is key. Are there any other hurdles?
You'll probably face stricter lending criteria, like a higher deposit. 20% is pretty standard, and be ready to provide a lot of documentation, proving your income, assets, the whole 9 yards.
Sounds intense. Any tips for navigating that process?
Honestly, a good mortgage broker can be a lifesaver. They can shop around for lenders, help you find the best terms. Really worth it.
Makes sense. Okay, let's talk about the extra costs. Taxes that are specific to foreign property owners in Australia. The article mentioned an annual vacancy fee. What is that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's designed to encourage foreign owners to rent out their properties instead of leaving them empty.
Ah, so if you're not living there yourself, you should make it available to rent.
Exactly. And the fee itself, it's calculated based on the property's value, so it can really add up.
I bet. So how can foreign owners avoid this fee?
Well, they can make sure someone's living in the property. They can genuinely list it for rent or, have it rented out for at least 183 days within a 12-month period. So if it's just a vacation home you're using a few weeks a year, you'll probably have to pay the fee.
Makes sense. The government wants to make sure those properties are actually being used, contributing to the housing supply, not just sitting empty.
Exactly.
Okay. What about other taxes? Anything else specific to foreign owners?
Well, property taxes are a big one. Foreigners, just like Australians, are subject to capital gains tax. But there's a catch. They don't get the main residence exemption.
Main residence exemption. What's that?
Basically, it means if you sell your property in Australia, you'll have to pay capital gains tax on the whole profit, even if you were living there. Australians, on the other hand, can often exempt their primary residence from this tax.
Ah, so that's a big difference. So foreign owners definitely need to factor in the potential capital gains tax.
For sure. And then there's the withholding tax that applies when you sell Australian real estate.
Withholding tax, how does that work?
Essentially, if someone buys your property for, say, $750,000 or more, they have to withhold 12.5% of the purchase price. Send it directly to the Australian Taxation Office.
Wow, that's a big chunk. Any way to avoid that?
Yeah, there is. You can provide the buyer with a clearance certificate from the ATO.
Yeah,
Then they don't have to withhold anything.
got it. So you need to have your tax ducks in a row before you sell.
Exactly. Consulting a tax professional who knows about international real estate transactions can be a huge help. They can make sure you're doing everything right, minimizing your tax liability. It's not something you want to mess around with.
Great advice. So we've covered a lot, from who's considered a foreigner to the FIRB, the unique costs and taxes. It's clear buying property in Australia as a foreigner is, well, complicated. Lots of moving parts.
It definitely is. But there's another piece of the puzzle we need to talk about, Australia's housing market as a whole, and how these rules for foreign buyers fit into that bigger picture.
Right. Because the article paints a pretty concerning picture of Australia's housing affordability crisis. It mentions needing an income over $300,000 in many areas to comfortably afford a home.
It's a tough market, especially for first-time buyers. And the recent surge in overseas migration, it hasn't helped.
Yeah, the article says in the year ending June 2023, net overseas migration added 518,000 people. It's like adding a whole city.
It's a huge influx of people. And on top of that, new housing construction hasn't kept pace.
The government had a target of 1.2 million new homes, but they only managed to build 170,000. That's a big gap.
It is. And that mismatch between housing supply and demand, well, it's a big reason why prices are going up, making it even harder for Australians to get into the market.
So how do these recent changes to the foreign investment rules fit into all of this?
Basically, they're part of the government's plan to address the housing crisis. They want to make sure foreign investment is actually beneficial for the country.
The article mentioned tripling the fees for foreign buyers who want to buy existing homes.
Yeah, that's a key part of the strategy. They want to steer those investors away from competing with Australians, push them towards new housing developments instead.
So instead of potentially driving up prices in the existing market, they're encouraged to contribute to increasing the overall supply.
Exactly. Plus, there are stricter penalties for vacant properties now, and they're really stepping up compliance efforts, making sure foreign investors are following the rules.
That sounds like a multi-pronged approach, trying to tackle a very complex problem.
It definitely is. It's still early to say what the long-term impact will be, but it's clear the government is taking the affordability issue seriously.
And they're trying to find a balance, welcoming foreign investment, but also protecting the interests of their own citizens.
It's a tough balancing act, one that's probably going to keep evolving as things change.
Well, we've covered a lot, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Who's considered a foreigner, navigating the FIRB, the costs, the taxes, and even Australia's housing crisis? Phew. That's a lot. But we're not done yet. There's more to uncover in this complex world of Australian real estate.
Now, before we move on, I think it's important to remember that there are different perspectives on this whole issue of foreign investment in Australia's property market.
Right. It's a hot topic. Lots of debate.
Yeah, for sure.
Some people argue that foreign investment is actually crucial for economic growth.
Absolutely.
That it brings in jobs, stimulates the construction industry.
They often point out that, foreign buyers are more likely to invest in those big, large-scale development projects, the ones that wouldn't happen without their capital.
And those projects have ripple effects, right? It's not just the construction workers. It's the suppliers, the retailers, the whole community.
Exactly. But as with most things, there's another side to the coin.
And that's where those concerns about affordability come in.
Yeah.
The worry is that foreign investment could drive up prices, make it even harder for Australians to buy a home.
especially first-time buyers.
Exactly.
It's a valid concern. When you've got foreign buyers coming in potentially with more money, different motivations, it can create an uneven playing field.
And that can lead to frustration.
Yeah.
Australians who feel like they're being priced out of their own communities.
For sure. It's a sensitive issue. And that's why the government is trying to, walk that tightrope.
Encourage foreign investment to boost the supply of new housing, but also minimize the impact on affordability for their own citizens.
Exactly. It's complex. No easy solutions.
No easy answers. So let's bring it back to our listeners. If you're a foreigner and you've been thinking about buying property in Australia, what are the key things you should be thinking about after this deep dive?
Okay. The first thing, and I can't stress this enough, it is possible for foreigners to buy property in Australia. But it's a carefully regulated process. Specific rules, specific conditions. You can't just jump in.
You'll need to get that approval from the FIRB, the Foreign Investment Review Board. Go through that application process, pay those fees, and prove that your purchase fits Australia's idea of national interest.
Right. And be prepared for those extra expenses, like that annual vacancy fee if you're not renting the property out, and the property taxes, especially that capital gains tax without the main residence exemption.
We also talked about the challenges of financing. Getting a mortgage as a foreigner, you might face stricter lending criteria, higher deposit requirements.
And my biggest piece of advice, don't try to do this alone.
Yeah, that's important.
The rules and regulations can change. It's always best to talk to legal and financial professionals who specialize in this area. Make sure you've got the most up-to-date information, that you're making informed decisions.
This is not a DIY project. Expert guidance is key.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up completely, I want to leave you with something to think about. We've talked a lot about the government's efforts to encourage foreign investment in new housing developments. But do you think that's really going to address Australia's affordability challenges in the long run? What do you think?
That's a great question. Will we see enough new housing being built? Will it be enough to stabilize prices? Or will those other factors, like population growth and interest rates, keep pushing prices up?
So many questions to consider, and we encourage you to keep following this issue. Do your own research, form your own opinions. The Australian housing market is dynamic, it's complex, and understanding how all these pieces fit together, foreign investment, government policy, economic trends, it's vital for anyone who's interested in this market, whether you're buying, selling, or just watching from the sidelines.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring this whole world of foreigners buying property in Australia. But the conversation doesn't end here.
There's always more to learn, more to discover. And we want to leave you with one final thought, something to really spark your curiosity. We've been focusing on how Australia is approaching this balance, right? The benefits of foreign investment, but also keeping things affordable for their citizens. But let's zoom out for a second. Think about the bigger picture, the global perspective.
Interesting. Are you saying we should be thinking about how these trends in Australia might be playing out in other countries facing similar challenges?
Exactly. As more and more people around the world are looking for opportunities, investments beyond their own borders, how can we make sure that global real estate markets stay accessible, equitable for everyone? It's a big question. And it hints at the need for maybe greater international collaboration, maybe even new models for real estate development and ownership. Models that prioritize sustainability, inclusivity, the well-being of communities worldwide.
Now that's something to think about. And on that note, we wrap up our deep dive into the world of foreign property ownership in Australia.
We hope you found it informative, insightful, and maybe even a little bit thought-provoking. Keep exploring this fascinating world of real estate and its impact on all our lives.
Until next time, happy diving.